Hi, my name is Callie Burke. I'm here at the Kennedy Space Center, and we're going to be talking about what it's like to watch a rocket launch live and in person. And so this is for the International Space Apps Challenge for 2016, Launch a Global Experience, which is asking people to try and build experiences so people can, who are far away, can experience them, because it's very different than watching the video and audio online, which also takes a lot of close-up shots. It's not quite the same as when you watch it in person. So I have myself and Jim Suderman. So we both work for, we've been here at Kennedy. I've been here since 2002, and Jim's been here since 1984. And we are currently working for NASA's Launch Services program. And so I'm a trajectory, we're both aerospace engineers. I'm a trajectory analyst, and Jim is a guidance, navigation, and controls engineer. So for the Launch Services program, we work with the rockets that are owned by commercial companies, but they're launching NASA robotic spacecraft. They're studying the Earth, going to other planets, studying the sun, their telescopes, lots of different things. And we make sure that they get there safely and on time and can do their job once they're up in space. So we also have with us Vivien. So if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi all, I'm Vivien. I just graduated from the MIT Media Lab Masters. I saw my first launch, and that was SpaceX CRS-8, which was really exciting because it was too perfect, I think. I think a lot of people would agree that nothing went off, and it was a little too perfect. So very, very fortunate.
So, all right, and why don't we start with you, Vivien, as you mentioned. So Jim and I have watched probably, so I sat down and figured it out. And so I've watched not quite 50 NASA launches, and then once you add commercial ones, I've probably seen about 70 to 90. And,
and I've seen probably every shuttle. I didn't see the very first one, but I saw every one after that, and then lots and lots of the regular rockets, commercial, military, otherwise, NRO.
And then also you saw some before you came in 1984, correct? Did you see any as a kid, or?
Yes, actually, that's true. Sorry, glad you reminded me. When I was little, we lived in Orlando for a few years, and we saw, as an elementary school student, I saw Shepard through Glenn. So first 3 man launches from, but that was from afar, all the way from Orlando. But we could see him.
Yeah. So, okay, well, Vivien, why don't you tell us about so you've watched rocket launches online before. So how is it different when you got to Kennedy and watched one in person?
So when you see it on a nice little screen that you can sort of zoom in via your face as far as you want, you can see a lot more. So that's very, very surprising, first off. The scale of everything is just so different from what you would imagine. Like, you think cameras are zooming in and out, and they're placed in faraway places, but actually that faraway place is the closest you can physically get without hurting yourself. And so that was a very surprising element, is just knowing that the rocket is like this tiny, and you can still see it. So when I first got there, it was really hard to actually locate where the pad was, and there were a bunch of people sort of pointing at different structures that they could see from far away. And it was that was an interesting exercise, but then it was pretty obvious where the rocket was. But as it launched, then you're like, okay, well, that's really small, but thank goodness for that blinding light, because then you can finally see it. So there's this huge, intense, blinding light, which you don't expect, even though you see that in the videos. And I think you don't expect it because your eyes can't adjust to it. And when you see it on a camera, it just feels very bright. But when you see it in person, it's a whole nother level of intensity. And yeah, that was really amazing to see, especially if you like fires. So that was great. And in addition to just understanding the launch itself, is understanding the ambiance around you. I found that a really, really big part of the experience for me was seeing the other people around me so interested. So everybody was just buzzing with excitement prior to the launch, and then as the countdown started, everything went quiet, and I think all the animals did too. But everything was just very hushed. We were all focused on that little point And then as it started to smoke and you see all the water coming out and you see the blinding light, everybody was just, jaws down, eyes wide, and just focus on that tiny little dot out in the distance. So that ambience was amazing. And then the cheers afterward when everything was successful and they knew that everything was as planned, I think that was very, very nice, and that's missing from the videos.
So, and you were on top of you were on the 5th floor balcony of the operational support building 2, which is about 4.5 miles away. So you actually, I think, were there. You guys were launch guests with some of the VIPs. That was fun.
Yeah, that was. I mean, this is the best first experience you could have ever asked for. Everything went off without a hitch, and you had the best seats ever.
So, and then what was the weather like that day?
It was really nice. There was, I think the day before, a 70% chance of launch. That's what I heard. And then the day of, it was like 90%, and it was pretty obvious. I mean, the skies are perfectly clear and blue and beautiful. And if anything, that kind of made it harder to see things because everything was such a nice sort of even color. So yeah, but it was beautiful weather.
Okay. So, oh, cool. So thanks for sharing that. So yeah, so we have some more questions. As everyone is welcome to send in questions we have the Q&A feature on, and I'll occasionally be looking at the 321 liftoff hashtag on Twitter. And then you could email them in also. So, and Vivien, if you have questions for Jim and I as we talk about stuff, you feel free to interrupt us and ask us about that. So, okay, so we talked about, so I guess our first question we're going to talk about is like what it's like, what are you feeling before launch? When anxiety, following going on. So for me, one thing that's different about, because I do watch launches that are taking place at other places online sometimes, and so for me, like the big thing is, like when I'm following online, I can kind of like just go back and check the website and just see what's going on, and if it doesn't go that day, like, oh, no, it's kind of still just like a video I'm going to watch later. But when you're doing it in person, we have smartphones nowadays, but it's still hard to actually get connected, because
Right.
I like to take audio during launch, and so that's what I'm going to focus on, like the last couple minutes. But also, if you've got, depending if it's a crowded spot, because there's employee spots that we like to go watch. Like I like the Causeway. I don't know where you like to watch launches.
I like to watch from the fire escape here on Melbourne.
So we have.
It's about 4 stories high.
Yeah. So which I think that's 5 stories.
Yeah. Oh, you're.
Because we have that extra floor where it is at, and I like to watch there too. I kind of go in between. It depends on especially if I'm wearing a dress that day. So then the Causeway is a little more friendly than a big fire escape. And it's windy. So yeah, so you have people around you who we're all trying to figure out what's going on. And so we've got like videos that everyone's listening to, and the smartphones that get you stuff, but it's kind of hard to sometimes keep up. The radio is often a lot better.
Right. It used to be, especially for the shuttle launches, they had a PA system. It was broadcasting all around, and you could hear it if you were on the fire escape. But with the commercial launches, they don't pipe that in anymore like they used to.
Yeah.
So you're up there, and you're kind of not sure, is it going to launch or not launch? And then, well, why? Hey,
Yes.
it didn't launch when it said. Should I wait up here, or did they scrub it or not? So yeah, smartphone helps.
Yeah, it's definitely, because it's even hard for me to remember back to what it was like before then, because I only had a couple of years of that. Mm-hmm. But the PA systems are nice, although sometimes you can always hear them very well, depending on what it was. Yeah. But it's always, and it's great because when you get people together, because even though we've seen large numbers of launches, I still, especially if I'm on center and even if I'm off center, I make sure I watch it. Sometimes I'll come in for them, or I'll like work late or come in early to watch a launch. So we still get excited about them.
Space flight now is a good thing to connect to.
Yeah.
They give you a running commentary, and if something goes wrong, it's not too long before they're typing it in. Yeah,
that's among the ways that locals use to keep track, and it's very good for the commercial launches because then you don't have the NASA connection.
Right.
But yeah, it is a big difference between if you have a launch that's happening that's just 1 second, it's just instantaneous window versus like a 2-hour one.
Right.
They usually, for operational purposes, don't go much beyond 2 hours. But I have waited 2 hours, to see when the launch is going to happen. It's usually happening when somebody's here for something special, and so I'm with people that are from off center. But even if you're working and you're like, all right, well, I've got these meetings going on, how do I go outside and make sure I see it?
Yeah.
Because our people, when we dial in, they're usually pretty reasonable and let us slip out for a few minutes to go watch a launch.
And another kind of default place to watch for people that live around here is from home.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of launches from my front porch, especially one that's at night or sometime when I'm not actually at work.
Yeah. That's a good place. And then people like to go, we have a lot of rivers around here, and so people like to go line up against them. So you see parked cars. And so that's always fun to see, is like when you're driving around and you'll see everyone lined up against the water, ready to watch them. I've had a couple times where launches have happened while I've been unfortunately sick and not feeling well, and so I can actually watch them from my bedroom window. So I've actually opened up the curtains, watched the launch, and be like, all right, it's time to lay down again.
And people get somewhere high, like on a bridge, and they'll be parked up there or lined up there, parked on the ends of the bridge, and then they walk into the middle.
Yeah, and the big reason that we like to get high is so Florida is very flat, and so are quite a few of the other launch sites, and so and we have lots of trees and stuff around here. So I can go to the causeway and watch on the ground, and there's just water between me and the rocket pads. But from our building, we have forests. Right. We're in a wildlife refuge, so we have trees all around us. So if you're at the ground level and you don't have just water between you and the pads, you have to wait for it to clear the trees before you can see it. And so that's true for lots of places. That's where the bridges and whatever few tall buildings we have around here.
And the fire escapes.
The fire escapes are good. So yeah, those are things. And
one thing that's funny about when they do have a PA system and announcing, a lot of times the announcer, he's either in a building or for the shuttle. They were at Houston.
Oh yeah.
And they don't necessarily know what's actually going on. If there's an incident, an accident, a rocket blows up, they may just keep talking.
Yeah.
And you're going, doesn't this guy know that this just bad thing happened?
Yeah, so I actually do social media for NASA's Launch Services program, and so we'll be posting things, and so I haven't had that happen where something anomalous, but I do have to get confirmation before we make something public, because we don't want to tell people something before it's actually, before we got confirmation. We don't want to speculate on what's going on if you're in that public area. So yeah, those are all different ones, and I find where you watch from, every rocket launch is always going to be different. That's one thing that I like to say I love about living here, is that I get to critique rocket launches. I kind of have
become a connoisseur.
I become a connoisseur.
That's right.
Yes.
It's like the Grateful Dead concerts or fine wine.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Somebody follows them around because they're never the same.
Yeah.
A big thing is the rocket configuration is always different. So, watching a space shuttle launch, space shuttle launches were pretty, as far as the rocket, that's very uniform. But once you start talking about different rockets, for example, one of the ones we work with is an Atlas V, and so it can have no solids to 5 solids, and that's a very different launch to watch. Just the speed, actually here we have... Ooh. Yeah, we can use, this is our little demo rocket that I have. So this is actually an Atlas V 551. So the second 5 indicates how many solid rocket boosters, and it just moves super fast because the solids are great for getting oomph.
A lot of kick.
Yes. Yeah. And other ones too, and so a Delta IV has a heavy configuration, and so watching that, is quite a scene. But the other ones are really interesting too. And then weather. I think my favorite launches are dawn launches, because I like it. the rocket takes off, and so it's like a night launch when it first happens. You have a little bit of twilight, but it's still very dark, and so when night launches occur, basically like the whole sky lights up.
Yeah, it turns into daylight.
It's very interesting, and only, I mean, it lasts for a little bit. It's really when everything ignites that it's very much like daylight, and then and especially when you've got reflection off the water, that happens a lot more when it's down the ground, because then it's even more so when you've got all the reflection. But as it gets higher, then it starts to become like this light in the sky.
Right.
And so the daylight only lasts for a little bit. I used to call it a false dawn. That was what I called it with a shuttle launch.
And like Vivien was saying, if you're there with a lot of people and it's dark or dim, and it's like you're not seeing them that well, and then the launch happens, and if you happen to look around, it's like you see everybody all of a sudden.
So yeah, I do remember that, because especially when we come in for morning launches, like before work for like a 5 or 6 a.m. one, so you could just get there super early, and everybody comes in separately. And that's always the thing about launches, and this is more, I mean, it's true for lots of events. But yeah, people kind of trickle in, and then we all try and leave at once. Either the scrub has happened or the launch has happened. So yeah, it can be surprising, because you don't really know how many people are around you until that happens. So yeah, with the morning ones that right before sunset rise happens, so the rocket takes off and it's night, and then as it gets in the sky, the sun will come up, and you get these beautiful colors if there's a nice contrail, which depends on the weather. And lots of times sometimes it won't have one at all when it's in the lower atmosphere, and then as it gets higher, all of a sudden the contrail kind of appears.
Yeah, right, just because it goes to a different pressure in the atmosphere or a different dew point at the different levels. Yeah.
And so it will stick around, and so it depends. You actually look at it, if for one of those ones where it's appearing, you get a good idea of the winds that day. Because every once in a while you'll see one where it does not move. That contrail just stays there. Nothing happens to it as the rocket goes away.
Which means no wind.
Yes, which means there's no wind at that altitude. But then other ones, you'll just see it go in all these crazy patterns. I mean, there was one I remember that looked almost like a heart in the sky. That was, so I was kind of, so like people look at clouds and try and guess their shapes. I'll do that with the contrails, which you don't often see online, as it goes on. And it's constantly changing. It's definitely not constant. And with the dawn, and it does this with the sunset launches too, you just get these beautiful colors that will come up just like clouds are turned different colors. But you'll get more colors sometimes over a smaller area.
Yeah, it makes sense. And sometimes, depending on the time of the day, well, like a dusk launch, when the sun has gone down, it's dark on the ground, and then as the rocket goes up, it pops back into the sunlight, and the contrail lights up, and you just see that clean line.
Yeah. So, and lots of times you can see the shadow of the contrail if it's a dawn or dusk one. So if you look, you'll actually see it in the sky. You'll see this shadow.
Yeah.
It's faint. It's interesting. But yeah, it is interesting because when you see the rocket all of a sudden get lit up by the sky, and you just don't expect it, even though you've seen it before. That's one thing I also find is sometimes I'm surprised by something that I've experienced before, because you don't always know how exactly it's gonna be portrayed. And there was one that was very interesting. Did you watch the Muse 4 one? I think it was Muse 4. I'll have to go back and see which Muse number it was, where it was a morning launch, and it did like this angel trail kind of thing, we called it. As it got up, there was still enough atmosphere that you could see it, and it was lit up. It was an early morning launch. It wasn't a dawn launch. It was still quite a bit before, but it got high enough up you could see it. And it was just a really interesting effect to the atmosphere.
Yeah. And I'd say that's a real truism, is that there's kind of like no two of these things that are alike, because there's the conditions are different, time of day is different, the rockets themselves are different. So I don't know. I mean, I'm still going to go out and watch the next one. I'm not jaded yet.
No, yeah, I'm not there either. Okay, So have you ever? So I find when I go out to like the causeway or else the night launches, you can hear night noises a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll be listening to them beforehand, and you'll kind of hear. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it, but something changes with the animals sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. You can actually. That's one thing you can kind of see online, depending on the shot.
Uh-huh.
But the animals react, and they usually react before you think that they would. Like they may react. They may, and there's no telling what it is they're exactly reacting to. But before you hear the sound, the birds will start flying. It's like maybe they feel a vibration in the ground, or there's something that kind of spooks them, and other animals do the same thing. So sometimes you'll all of a sudden there'll be a bunch of birds that just like take off, and if there had been like animal noises, that stops.
Yeah.
Even like little frogs, it seems like they stop too.
The crickets, and that's why I like to do the audio, is because it's I can turn it on and then forget about it on my phone, but you can hear it and it preserves the memory for me. And so I let the causeway ones at night, you can hear all the animals in them too.
Yeah.
And actually, the last one, it was really funny. This is the first time it happened. I was off of the Banana River, and I was up on a little hill, and there was an alligator. We couldn't see him, but we could hear him, and he was like. And so this happened about a minute after launch, and he kept, like, every 30 seconds he would bellow. He did not like the launch. He was kind of upset.
You're messing up my nap.
So, and actually, Vivien, do you want to talk about what the experience was for you, the sound and the vibrations that happened during launch, how that was different than you were expecting?
Yeah, that was surprisingly different, actually. So in the video, everything kind of syncs up really nicely because magic editing. But when you're there, you think it's going to be loud, like really loud, as soon as you see the little bright light of the fire and the rockets basically starting. But it's not. It's really quiet, surprisingly quiet. But as soon as it gains altitude and it looks like it's coming towards you, and I think that's just how the rocket was moving at the time. It looked like it was going towards me, but it definitely wasn't. As soon as it reached sort of kind of above my head, it felt like, that's when I heard that huge rumbling noise, and that was really weird to hear in person because there are like little vibrations with that. And so it feels like you're in the belly of a beast and it's kind of digesting you, which is kind of cool. So it was a cartoony feeling. It's just something you don't expect. So that was really cool.
So, yeah, and that happens, it's every time. It's like when you're, you wait for it to come. And so actually, sometimes I feel like even though I know that I'm always going to see it first, you feel like you're listening for it first, but that's never how it's going to be. You really, and even sometimes I have the experience of if I'm listening to audio, the audio might have a couple seconds delay. And so they might be on 3, 4, and then the rocket goes. Yeah. And that's due to a couple of things. For some rockets, the rocket engines do actually light a couple seconds before the official liftoff. And so T0 rockets are already burning.
That's when T0 is when it's supposed to be off.
Liftoff means it's overcome its own gravity and it's actually moving. It's moving. This is the ground. So it could be on the ground, and for a couple seconds the engines are lit, and so but T0 occurs when it actually takes off from the ground. It's overcome its own gravity. So yeah, I know that every time, but sometimes your brain still expects it to be in a certain way.
And since it's 4.5, 5 miles away, the sound, it takes a significant amount of time to get to you.
Yeah.
So the rocket might be higher in the sky than you would think before you actually hear it. And to me, one of the things I like to describe about the sound is that it shakes my pant legs around my ankles. It's so intense that it does that. And Vivien had a point. sometimes after you view a lot of them, atmospheric conditions can actually make a big difference in how loud it is.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of rocket, like the shuttle, again, it was so similar as a vehicle, but if there was like a little cloud bank that they were launching through, it would bounce off of that and really intensify the sound. Or even just a temperature inversion in the atmosphere, the same thing would happen. So, and then other days, like especially in a nice, really beautiful, clear day, like the one that Vivien saw, well, the sound just, it disperses. It's still loud, but it's not as loud as you remember that other one was.
Yeah, and that was actually happened to me. So one of the viewing sites we have is Banana Creek, and so that's kind of, if you ever come to Kennedy Space Center Visitor Center, where you go to see the Saturn V rocket, that's where Banana Creek viewing site is. And so that's one of the closest viewing sites you can get to. It's 3 miles away. And one of the few shuttle launches I saw from there, you never felt it. You could hear it, but normally you feel this pressure, and it comes through your chest.
Right, yeah.
And for whatever the conditions were that day, even though we were very, very close, we didn't feel it. And people who'd never seen a launch were turning around to me, because I was an intern at the time, so I'd seen several launches. They're like, "Why didn't we feel it?" I'm like, "I don't just close that day."
That's right.
Because I talked to them about that. I'm like, "Oh, you're gonna feel it. It's great." And they're like, "But I didn't feel it." I'm like, "I didn't either. I don't."
Yeah.
And so, and there's famous stories of at Marshall Space Flight Center when they would be doing, I think it was at Marshall, they were doing rocket testing back decades ago.
Yeah, they actually tested the Saturn V engines right close to Huntsville, Alabama, which they have now moved all that way out in the swamp in Mississippi. But back in the day, yeah, they tested the engines there.
And so I think there was a day they did it where the cloud conditions were such they broke a lot of windows.
Yeah, that's right. They had to replace, NASA had to replace windows in downtown Huntsville.
Yeah, so the weather is huge. I mean, it's also, as you were talking about, because you had a pretty clear sky day, the Vivien that watched it, but it's interesting because the clouds, because I love Florida's clouds, because we get all kinds of different weather conditions as things move from the Gulf to the Atlantic, and so you watch it, and so the clouds, you'll see it sometimes go into clouds, light up a cloud. That was my first shuttle launch, STS-105 or 9, totally lit up this cloud, and then sometimes they'll move above them, and then some days you don't ever see it again.
That's right. It depends on what's between you and the rocket. Yeah.
And so another thing that I think that, and maybe you can say if you experience this, is that I find that you spend a lot of time looking to see kind of where the rocket is. And so on a clear day, sometimes you can follow it pretty well, but sometimes it's just a different one because you're searching for it, and it's like at the end, kind of like watching a star. And so, and if you've ever watched the space station looking for it, I think that's kind of my closest experience that I'd say for other things, as when you're like, all right, here's where it's supposed to be rising, and this is where it's supposed to be going up at this time, and it's kind of the same thing for that. So another thing that matters for as far as your location, where the rocket is going that day makes a difference.
Yeah, because there's a lot of different orbits that they're trying to get to. A common orbit out of here is basically going straight east, which puts you in a 28.5 degree orbit, because that's our latitude. But straight east is a very kind of efficient way to go. And when they do that, yeah, it takes off, and then it makes a turn, and it looks like it's just going straight away from you.
Yeah.
But if you're going like to the space station, that's a higher inclination. It's 51 something.
51.6, I think.
There you go. Thank you. 51.6 degrees. So it goes off more sideways, and you can see more of the way it starts straight and then makes a turn and starts actually flying horizontally once it gets pretty high up.
Yeah, because they always, and so I don't know, Vivien, when you were watching, if the pitch overs, I'm not sure how much you could see, it kind of surprised you, because as it goes up, it has to pitch over to start doing that, if you notice that.
To be honest, once I saw it go up, and then I saw those little, like what you call the contrails, I kind of lost sight of everything. I couldn't find the rocket again.
Yeah.
And what was funny was I had Sydney next to me, who has seen many launches, both many compared to me, but both in person and with video, live streaming. And he was saying, pay attention, there's going to be a puff of smoke. And I kept looking for the smoke, looking for the rocket, and I could not for the life of me find it. And he finally went, it's right there, next to, and I had no idea where he was pointing at that point. So I was actually, as a novice, virgin to launches, it was actually really hard to understand what was a telltale sign, what was a cloud, what was part of like a normal structure as it went through the atmosphere like that. And so it was tricky as somebody who's never really seen or somebody who doesn't know what to look for, in other words.
Yeah.
And the launch that you saw, the SpaceX launch, those are very unique. I mean, they're doing things that nobody else is doing. I think maybe part of the puff of smoke that they might have been wanting you to see was either the separation of the first and second stage,
yep,
or right immediately after that, the first stage actually starts puffing some thrusters so that it can turn itself around, and that the back end where the big rocket engines are pointing forward, which then they light off to slow it down so they can land. And the whole landing a rocket, the way they're doing it is I mean, it's Buck Rogers. It's something that nobody else does. And so that's a kind of a like me and Callie too. We've watched a lot of launches, but this is a new thing, and there's a lot of new things to look for, as you're observing it.
So yeah, I mean, I remember, and it's when we watched it, and so it was funny because I think I was about 4.5 miles away from where it launched, but then it landed at a different pad, so it was about 7.5 miles away from me.
Oh, when they had that landing?
Yeah, when they had the landing that came. And so the first thing was, people are like, we're all watching it, and even when it lands on the barge in Jacksonville, you can still see it come down from here, especially if you have binoculars. But when it came back to us, nobody could miss it at the end. And I remember looking, and I was just like, where is it? And I realized it was like, it felt like it was directly above me, and I was just not looking high enough up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite interesting to watch it come down in reverse.
Right. Yeah, it goes up like that, and then it comes down. And as it's coming down, you'd think it would be firing its rocket engines the whole time, but it's not. So there's this whole period of time where if you're got your cell phone and you're getting little updates and they're saying it's coming back, it's on the way back now, it's almost there, and you're going, especially at night, right? Yeah. Now you're going, well, where? And then all of a sudden, poof, it lights its engines for a brief period of time, and it's like, wow, it was right there.
Yeah.
And then the engines go off again, and they don't light up again until it's almost at the ground. And you're just thinking, I don't know. I was thinking, this isn't working. It's gonna be a big explosion.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, because whenever somebody tries something new, new things don't always work, and failure. You have to kind of know that failure. The first time you try things before they start becoming reliable, you just don't know. Mm-hmm. And they hadn't had a successful landing before that one where they landed on there. And so actually, I think Elon Musk said that the sonic boom happened right when it was coming down, and so
that was another thing.
You saw it light up at the same time you heard the boom reached you, and the boom actually happened higher up.
Up higher, yeah, right.
But by the time it came to you, it was when you could visually see it on the ground lighting up, and so a lot of us were like, oh my gosh, what happened?
It blew up.
And so I feel bad, Elon Musk, that he kind of had the same thoughts, and he was the same distance away from it as I was. Mm-hmm. So we were all kind of in the same boat where you're hearing it, the boom physically as you see it. But it did a great job for that one. So that was cool. So it was interesting to see that. And Blue Orbital has it where they landed their suborbital vehicle. So it's just, I love every time there's new experience. And there's a couple of rocket launches like the Ares 1X that I was out of town for, and it's Titan 4 I never got to see.
Yeah.
But
I think the one I wish I could have seen, but people tell me that is Saturn V. Mainly, one of the big things that they talk about as being different from any other rocket was it was so big that it took off of the pad so slowly. You could see the fire, you could see the smoke, but you couldn't see it move.
Yeah.
And even it took it several seconds to get moving to the point where you could tell it was moving.
Yeah.
And then it stayed majestic and slow, and it was very, very loud.
and the space shuttle and even some of our bigger rockets, you'll see that with too.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see the fire and it be going, and you're just like, is it going to take off? When's it going to go? And
Right.
it just has to. You have to wait for the liftoff to occur.
Right.
Let's see. And this one you can talk about, you've actually seen a couple rocket launches that have happened, you were watching in person, and they were an accident.
Mm-hmm.
You could talk a little, I have not had an in-person one, if you want to talk about that experience.
Well, one rocket launch that I was actually, it was a Delta II. I was at home. My wife was driving towards the Cape to go to Port Canaveral, and it took off, and I heard it. I hadn't really been tracking it. It was like it was a GPS satellite launch, and I heard it. I heard the rumble, and I heard the rumble for like a few seconds, and then there was this tremendous boom, and it shook all the windows in the house, and then nothing. No sound at all. I'm going, yeah, I went, this is not good. So at that point, I looked out my front room windows, and I saw what looked like a big fireworks display, you know, where they shoot up a firework and it goes out like that. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, you know, this is bad. And I didn't really know. I hadn't been like tracking that launch, so I didn't even know what was launching. I didn't even know what kind of rocket it was. It was going from the Air Force side, which is, you know, is not one of our rockets.
Yeah, it wasn't a NASA launch.
Yeah, it was an Air Force one. So one of the first thoughts in my head was, oh my gosh, it's a Titan. They were still launching Titans. And the Titan rocket was a rocket that used very toxic hypergolic fuel, hydrazine. And I'm thinking, you know, my wife's name is Beverly, and I'll say, Beverly, the brown cloud, run from the brown cloud. So that was a very spectacular launch, and there's still videos of it, like on YouTube and stuff. And literally, it blew up just a few hundred feet off of the pad. In big chunks, it had some solid rocket boosters on the side, and big chunks of that solid rocket fuel were flying through the air. I even had a friend who was actually working that launch for the Air Force, and he was in a bunker, which was by the pad, and his pickup truck was parked outside, and he showed us pictures of this melted pool of slag with 4 tires falling over, and it was just like, you didn't, other than the tires, you would never have known it was like a truck.
Yeah.
So a big piece of burning solid fuel had landed square on his truck and just melted it.
But we hear there are cars in that same parking lot who, if a piece didn't fall near them, there are some people that drove their cars away that day.
Yeah, right. It was all random.
It was all about whether it fell right next to your car.
Mm-hmm. I had the guy that hired me in, my first boss, he told me a story about going out to watch an Atlas rocket go off. And they were working on at the Cape, which is where their launch pad is, and they weren't too far away, but they weren't too close either. So they went outside to watch this thing. And it went up and it disappeared in the clouds. And then they heard this big boom.
Oh.
And they're standing there and they're going, wow, that's not right, you know. And it wasn't until pieces of rockets started like hitting the pavement around them. And they went, oh, we better get inside. We better go back in the building. So, when you have a failure, sometimes it can be a little hazardous to be in the wrong place. But sometimes they happen way out,
Yeah. And that's the big thing our range safety does a lot of work on. And so that's why we launch over the water for ours, and people, and some of the land ones that take place in other countries do it over large swaths of mostly unpopulated land, depending. That's why we try to be very strict. And so we take all these calculations into effect for the risk. And so we do accept a certain amount of risk by watching a launch on center and being closer. You're expecting a certain amount of risk that is just higher than if you were further away.
Right.
And we send out warnings to our whole local area for things like the brown cloud you're talking about, where wind can move things away. But a big thing is they kind of always tell us if something's going on. First of all, if you're a launch guest, listen to whoever the people are in charge. Go inside, get in a vehicle, and try to basically be in air conditioned so that you do it.
Yes.
So, my battery is actually running out. So, well, Vivien, do you have any questions about anything we've talked about that you'd want to learn more about?
I'd really like a comprehensive list of all the things that can go wrong. So one of the best is knowing that so many things can go wrong, and that when they didn't, you had reason to celebrate. And having a comprehensive list would be a really fun way to sort of prime my next experience.
Yeah. Well. The main thing, like Kelly said, like over the years they've made things a little safer, every time. And one of the reasons we're held so far away now, like the 4 miles away, is just that. If something's going to happen early that's bad, you don't want anybody close enough that they would be hit by anything, or there'd be a problem. And then the range safety, they actually have a big kind of red button, if you will, and they're watching the trajectory of the rocket the whole time, and it has to stay within a certain, like a little box. It has to stay right on that trajectory, and if it varies, the Air Force will actually blow it up, so that it doesn't like turn back and go land in Disneyland or hurt anybody. They're very careful about protecting people in the area. So and like I said, a lot of mishaps actually happen pretty far downrange. So by then it's way over the ocean, and that's one of the advantages of having a kind of a seaside or oceanside launch site.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, sorry about that. So can you hear and see us now?
Yeah, you're back online.
Oops, there we go. Can you, sorry, we didn't have it plugged in right. Can you hear and see us now?
Yep.
Okay. So, yep, sorry about that. I got it plugged in right as it switched.
Talk about a mishap.
So, yep, things. I went to get the battery earlier and I got distracted by a coworker. So, but let's see. Oh, I lost where my other questions were. So. See. Yeah, and one thing I heard people, as far as the one that happened high up with the SpaceX one a little over a year ago, people who are local, I was out of town for that one, but I have friends who, depending on where you were, people who were further north, they had a clearer view, so they knew what had happened.
There was some spotty clouds that day.
Yeah.
which is pretty common for launches.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, you just depends on, it's not like, oh, this one's better or worse, just that's where the cloud is today. It's in between you or the rocket.
Mm-hmm.
And so other friends couldn't see it anymore. And so the accident happened, and it was, you know, a while later before they found out, because for what they could see, it had been good and looked good for quite a while.
Yeah.
So, and it's always funny to me with the weather, because, man, that can be, you know, just like, what is going on today?
Mm-hmm.
So, because it'll be a beautiful day, but the upper level winds could be very high, which you don't necessarily have a visual of, but that can steer the rocket off course, or they're really, especially if their wind shears, could break the rocket.
That's where you have one wind going this way, and then, you know, 100 feet later, a strong wind is going the other way. And a rocket has a hard time flying through that.
Yeah.
So that's part of, during a launch, they're sending up balloons the whole time to try to detect any kind of wind shear. And if there is, they won't launch.
Yep. So yeah, so we do that ahead of time, and so that's something you can see. But there's other things like electric mill, which is, so it's like how the electricity is in the air, which
That's
again,
they call those field mills.
field mills. That's
Right,
what, yes.
and they pick up the difference in voltage between the ground and the clouds that are going overhead. And if the clouds are all charged up, like with a bunch of lightning, that's another reason they won't launch. But you might not be able to tell.
No, yeah, it seems like it's good, and that one's hard because it's a sensor that goes back and forth. And so sometimes it's like, well, if it's good during our launch window, we can go.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes you're going between red and green right before launch, and then it's always frustrating if there's a bunch of rain clouds right over the launch pad.
Yeah, right.
And everywhere around you look around and the sky's great, but right over the launch pad it's not. But you have the opposite sometimes too.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere around it'll look like, oh, those clouds look terrible,
Mm-hmm.
but right over the launch pad it's clear, and so we launch those days.
Yeah, that's right.
So, and I've taken people on buses to, sometimes I volunteer for that, even though I'm an engineer, I'll volunteer to escort people. And so we'll pick up at the bus, and that'll be, you know, 10 to 15 miles away at least. And they're like, oh man, it's raining, what's going to be like? I'm like, I don't know what it's like. We'll see when we get there, what it's like at that place.
This is Florida.
Yeah, this is
Right.
Florida. You can't tell what's going on everywhere else based on what's happening where you are. So it's different. So, okay. I'm trying to think if there are any other more items that we wanted to cover. So yeah, the sonic booms due to the landings are interesting. And with the shuttle, you were always trying to pick it out, just like with the night launch of the night landing at SpaceX. It was like, oh, where is it as it's coming down? And so you were looking around to see it too.
Yeah, the shuttle would, you know, you think it's going to come in like a jet airplane landing on the runway at an airport. So you're looking to the side, you know, side to side to see it, when really it's actually right overhead, and it's coming in on a big circle, and you hear the two booms, because there's a boom off each wingtip.
Yeah.
Boom, boom. And you go, well, it should be there. I should be able to see it. And if you aren't really looking at the right place, usually more straight up than you would think, you won't see it. And then it would, you know, sometimes it would land from the north, and the shuttle runway is actually to the north of our building. So sometimes it would come from the north and land that way. And it wouldn't be nearly as exciting when it came from the south and went
Yeah.
right over the top of our building.
Yeah.
That was totally awesome.
Yeah. So it's different landing plans due to the different directions. So.
I'm glad we're back in the landing zone.
So yeah, it makes things interesting, and refurbishing them is a whole interesting challenge.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Vivien, did you have any other questions? Okay. Oop. Yeah. I think you're muted.
Did I mute it? Oh, sorry.